So have we...
Can we just clarify one, Chair? Is that's in all, that provision's in all other committees?
As it's written there.
As it's written? So why would we not have it in this committee?
Can I say something? Mr. Chairman, just on the very grounds of the matter that I brought up before for expediency, if we were at a point where the committee was meeting to discuss a response to a position of the Environment Court or something, and we had to give our advice back or delegate a power to the staff through this committee, then we need that particular, without actually then having to wait and again miss time frames by referring it back to yet another council meeting. So I can't see this provision being used very frequently, but it's always a safeguard that it's a possibility of making a decision of council in a committee. And it's quite possible within the same thing to meet timeframes that could be necessary.
Well, I think it's still, I agree with that. You've got to have the capacity in certain circumstances, but the circumstances aren't defined clearly enough in my view.
Something to digest. Any other changes to this document?
One small matter. Myself and a member there, Mr. Baker. Myself and the member there, Mr. Baker, we went to Napier Boys High School and we did not take Latin. So if we could have here either in Māori or English, please. Numbers. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Any other changes to this? Do you wish? Have you got more?
No,
those are the key changes. Are there any other issues, questions about this paper before we go any further? So, Councillor Barker.
I'm on 14.
Page 14.
No, number 14.
Oh, number
on
14.
Page 12. Roman numeral 14. And I see a reference to the Environment Court. And I wonder why we restricted ourselves just to the Environment Court. I was thinking about appeals in terms of we've had the Board of Inquiry, we've made appeals to the High Court. Why have we just restricted ourselves to the Environment Court? I thought we could include any relevant appeal to any relevant authority to do with this, no matter who it is.
Is there a particular?
I guess the Environment Court is the first reference for any appeal against a decision of a territorial authority. So the territorial authority, say Hastings District Council, makes a decision on an application or a plan change, and an appeal to that on that decision would go to the Environment Court.
But we only likely to appeal things. Have these issues before the Environment Court? Would there not be other issues that could be through other tribunals?
Specifically around territorial authorities, huh?
Yeah.
Could it not be called
Could
in?
be.
Could it not be? Could that not be a situation where it's called in, determined by the Environment Court, and then we appeal to the High Court?
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
okay.
but this relates to territorial authority decisions.
Yeah, just purely territorial authority decisions as
Yeah.
written here.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is the pathway.
Wouldn't it be decisions?
It's the only pathway.
I think it's possible, Mr. Chairman, to refer a plan change directly to the Environment Court for hearing. In which case the level of appeal would be to the High Court.
So it could be include the High Court there.
To the well, should we just change to the relevant court?
The relevant court. Yeah.
Okay, there was others. Councillor Bevan, you had another one?
Yes, it was in relation to page 13H. Some English notes. Term of membership. It's got a reference to the review of this document following the 2013 training election of councils. Does that need to be there anymore?
No.
So I think
Strike it out, he says.
Yes, I think, well, part of it's relevant, but part of it's not, I think.
No.
This permit committee has already been established.
Well, it's relevant in 14 and 15, probably not so in 20 or 21.
Take out that first sentence.
Okay. Any others? I think we're getting towards the end of this. It's been a few discussions. Sure.
Process, Mr. Chairman, unless we can actually see the amendments printed up, could we have them circulated, please, at some stage? So there's nothing to stop this continuing the process of going out for the further consultation, but it does perhaps give another step of referring it back to the next committee meeting before it goes to council.
And also note 2.3 in the recommendations that the amended terms of reference as agreed will be considered by tangata whenua before it comes back to council. So there is still discussion going on.
Since we are talking about changing them so that we can all can see them, can it be referred back to this next committee before it goes to council?
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Queries?
So is there a little bit of work going to be done on the matters that have been raised here today?
Yes.
And
will be recirculated.
Right.
Yep.
One question to Councillor Dick. Is that clause, you seem to be quite passionate about, is it a deal breaker for you? That the delegated powers issue, is that a deal breaker for you?
No, it's not, but I'd like to see some definition around when it should or shouldn't be used.
You'll find out of a deal breaker when he votes, Councillor Graham. It is. Okay, any other questions? Someone happy to move the recommendation?
Chairman, I'm happy to move it with a change of the following words in 2.3, consider the next Regional Planning Committee meeting.
Happy to move it at that. We have a seconder for that. Mr. Baker, do you wish to speak, Councillor Scott?
Mr. Chairman, it's very good to see a good debate around these things. We want the terms of reference that give us the best outcomes, and so I just thank everybody for participating in a very robust discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Further? Other speakers? It's all been said. I'll put the motion, then all those in favour please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Thank you for your participation. Look, there's a cup of tea ready at 3 o'clock, but I think we'd probably just get into this next item, and if it is going to be a long discussion, I'll break part way through and we're going to have a cup of tea. So I'll hand over to Mr. Maxwell to take us through you've got a PowerPoint there? Oh, everyone's got a copy.
Got a copy,
Tēnā
tēnā koutou.
copy on your desk.
Yep. So there should be in front of you a couple of items. So if you haven't got them, one is a copy of the PowerPoint, because there are some tables in here that Tanya, could you just pass it around to Tom, please? Because there are some tables that are hard to read, and the other is.
Do you have one, Walter? What do you got on your stereo, Walter? Led Zeppelin.
The other document is not one that I'm proposing to go through, but just
I'm recording your conversation.
just one to give you a sense of the complexity around the legislation changes, which we'll get to shortly. So we do have a presentation to run through, and I'd just like to welcome and introduce Gavin Ide, Manager Policy and Strategy, for those of you who don't know him, and Malcolm Miller, Manager Consents, who will go through parts of this as well. So,
right, well, let's go through the PowerPoint. Questions as we go.
Yep.
Okay.
Sure. So by way of background, I guess this paper is about providing some context to the discussion.
Just so we're clear, we're on page 17, item 9, water quantity allocation policy and consenting processes, right?
That's correct. Right. So it's important. There is a high amount of public interest in this, but it's really important that this committee has the right information in front of it, so it understands what council's role in this and what it can and can't do. There are some things that the paper will consider and some that it won't, and one that it won't is ownership of water. That's not something the paper has got into. It is something that on the national agenda at the moment, but it's not something this council is particularly influencing at this point.
Our great leader says no one owns water, so I'll believe him.
Right, great. I'll just note that there are matters that staff have discretion over, have no discretion over. Those are things that are locked in policy or in legislation, and that we simply can't sort of change these things on the hoof, so to speak, as issues arise. And just on that point, I'd like to take the opportunity just to note that there has been some commentary that the staff involved in managing this part of council's business aren't up to the job. That's not correct. There are a very professional, very competent group of people involved in resource management planning and implementation of that through the consents team and the council, and we are fortunate to have them. But they can only work within the framework by which they've been provided. So that they've got a world they have to operate in. Like I say, there are things they can influence and things they cannot, things they can do and things they cannot. And it's important to understand what is within their sphere of influence. And of course, within all of this, there are things that can be changed, but these things may not be able to be changed quickly, and that they would have to be discussed with our community through a policy type process. Those are the things that council might deal with. So now into some of the detail. Could we impose a charge for water? That's something that's cropped up on numerous occasions. We can't under the current legislative framework. We can and do recover our administrative costs, so the cost of lodging and processing a resource consent, the cost of compliance, monitoring with that consent, and we also run a Section 36 zone-based, at the moment, zone-based science water charge program, which recovers about a third of the costs of the science program involved in research and monitoring of the water resource in particular. So that only applies to water-related consents.
But you can also charge for conveyance of water, as in, urban reticulation or reticulation from an irrigation scheme.
Absolutely, yes. Once you've invested in infrastructure, if you're a territorial authority and you want to recover the costs of that, but in terms of this council's functions, that's not something that we would necessarily do. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? Just for clarity, because it is one of the things that is coming up publicly. What is the position with charging from water from the Ruataniwha water storage system? Should it go ahead?
So, sorry, the question is, will this council charge HBRC for water in the storage scheme?
Yeah.
So we would charge them the costs of consenting, if it was relevant, certainly compliance monitoring costs, and zone-based science water charges. That will be recovered from them, but a per litre or per cubic metre rate type charge for water from HBRC for the storage scheme would not be imposed.
Is it water that HBRC would be selling, or is it the storage of water that they would be selling?
That's something you'd probably need to get HBRC to answer, but I would imagine what they're charging people for is the cost of construction and reticulation of that water. It's not the water per se. But that's something best directed to HBRC.
Sorry, so if I'm living in Auckland, I pay, water's metered there, so what am I paying for?
You're paying for the cost of Auckland Council to construct and manage a storage dam, run a purification or treatment system of the water, and convey it to your property under pressure.
But not the water itself?
Not the water itself.
Okay.
Yeah. So the reason I've provided you with this foreign document, to me, I'm sure there are others around the table who are far more versed in cabinet guidance than I am, is just to give you a sense of the complexity of changing the legislation. So if we wanted to start imposing a charge for water, a per litre rate, arguably that is possible. It's not something this council could do. It's something that would have to be imposed through national legislation. And I simply searched for this and provided it just because A, I'm not an expert on this stuff, and B, it just gives you a sense of the complexity involved in that. So it's possible, but it's not something you would do quickly, and certainly not something this council would do. This council may have a view on it, but it's not something the council could do off its own initiative.
But there certainly would be consideration.
Turn your microphone
If the
on.
water fell out of the sky and I captured it in a tank. Now, if you take a board charging for water because you have some certain amount of ownership of the water per se, what that suggests to me is that the water in the cloud that drops down is now up for charge. I think that's that is fundamentally against the Treaty of Waitangi. The Treaty of Waitangi guaranteed exclusive and undisturbed possession of the forests, the rivers, the waterways in Article 2 of the treaty. So I hope that our learned friend will take that into consideration. That's what we're doing here as Maori representatives. That it's not just a clinical decision whether to charge for water or not to charge for water, charge for reticulation or piping or conveyance. I keep saying that the face of local government has to change. So, I'm putting a can of worms there. I don't worry about it. That's what you get your academics from Victoria University from. But it's time to include. We've just received of Tanga Whenua a document, so I'm not hearing in this presentation those considerations,
We're not finished
Mr.
yet,
Chairman.
Uncle. And where have you hidden all this water in your tank? Want the address?
How big is the tank?
Mr. Chairman.
Carry on. Councillor Belford.
If we were to wish to consider a charge for water, last remarks notwithstanding, that's a policy change. Would it be coming before this committee, or would that be strictly a council decision?
Well, Gav, I'm sure will jump in if I'm incorrect, but it's probably unlikely to be a policy decision of council. In order to be able to, or this committee, or whoever that authority may be, it would need to be a change in the legislation to enable you to do that, going back to Walter's point. So, and look, you know, that landscape may well change. Like I said, the paper doesn't traverse rights and interests over water or who owns it. There is a much bigger discussion about that on the go at the moment, and we acknowledge that, but we don't, it's not within our box, if you like, at the moment. I'm not saying it's not important, because it is. And out of that may be a completely different way of viewing this and working with water. That being the case, we as good, faithful local government servants will pick that up and faithfully implement it as intended.
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
Toro?
Yeah. So, you want us to make a decision today, and
No.
It's
no,
just
no,
what-
on the well, I mean, you know, not
Receive the report.
Receive the report. That is,
Yeah.
And like what I would like to see is probably more data on what areas where there are, because your role is to manage water, you know, the resource, I suppose. What I would like to see is.
I think that's coming in the preso. We've only just started.
Okay, yeah, I'll leave it.
Save it for the end,
Yeah,
boss. Yeah, okay.
yeah.
So just the other thing is people want to know about what's going on. So can they access information? That information around consents has always been available. It's just what we call discoverable. So you can come and ask for it, and we will provide it for you. It's important to note that we do have a system of notifying people, or advising them, I should say, rather than notifying people of what consent applications have come in the building. That doesn't constitute them being considered what we call an affected party, so somebody whose approval might be required for the consent. It's just for information. But we certainly welcome that and certainly provide what we can to people who are interested. And more broadly, we are developing some information on our webpage that will explain things like how the aquifer behaves, and particularly the Hiratonga aquifer, what we monitor and where, what that's telling us, and then how the policy and consenting process works that Gavin and Malcolm are going to give you a little bit more detail on now. So that's where I finished. I'm just going to hand over to Gavin now to go through a little bit of policy background.
All right. So I've mentioned in the past, in previous meetings of this committee, that there is a hierarchy of legislation down through national planning instruments such as national policy statements, national environmental standards. There we have regional policy statement, regional plans.
Councillor Scott, just order, please.
Yeah, so regional policy statement that we must have. We've got some regional plans. Lower in that hierarchy are things like district plans and sort of one-off resource consent applications. So in terms of regional policies for water allocation, there is a hierarchy of planning instruments. The regional policy statement I've mentioned in the past is something that is mandatory. This council must have one. And our regional policy statement became, second generation regional policy statement became operative in August 2006. One of the first second generation RPSs in the country to do so. Likewise, our coastal plan, we've reviewed it. Second generation version of that became operative late last year. We were at the front of the queue, front of the lineup as well in terms of having that first to be made operative in the country. Both of those planning documents are mandatory. All of the other regional plans, air, land, water, gravel extraction, they're optional. But it just so happens that this council chose once upon a time, in its wisdom, to combine all of those regional plans, except the coastal one, into one planning document. And while they were at it, we've merged that with the regional policy statement. That combined planning document is known as the Regional Resource Management Plan. That Regional Resource Management Plan became operative in August 2006, and we're now circling back around sort of like an issue-based, or in some cases catchment-based, third generation cycle of some of those planning provisions. In terms of water allocation policies, water quantity allocation policies, the RPS does outline some key objectives that signal what this council is striving for, and it's around sustainable groundwater allocation and surface water allocation. Certainly managing cumulative effects of groundwater takes, new ones on existing other groundwater takes, and certainly is mindful of the need for any use of water to be efficient. That's backed up by various regional plan type policies as well. Regional plans are the planning instruments that have the rules in them. But those current regional plans for Hawke's Bay do not override the RMA's default position that water is allocated on a first in, first served type of basis. Those regional plans do include limits for such as minimum flows and allocatable volumes for surface water, but in those current regional plans there are no such limits for groundwater. But we're seeing that sort of begin to change in things such as the Tukitok Plan Change 6, where we're getting new enhanced limits for both surface water and groundwater. Those regional plans have policies and rules to manage stream depletion effects on surface water bodies. Policies and regional plans also provide guidance that new takes are not to affect existing efficient groundwater takes. These sorts of policies providing guidance can then help inform the consents team or consent authority in relation to water take permits and so on. I've mentioned that Plan Change 6 provides an enhanced allocation regime, but even then, for Plan Change 6, it's still pretty much the first in, first served basis for new takes, new water takes. Coming back to the hierarchy of planning instruments, we've got the RMA, national policy statements. One of those national policy statements is the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. And in there, the National Policy Statement for Freshwater directs council and other regional councils to establish objectives and to set limits for freshwater in regional plans. And in the latest version of the NPS for freshwater, it signals that that objective and limit setting process is to follow a NOF, or a National Objectives Framework, which steps you through identifying your freshwater values, having a conversation with your community about what the objectives are for how that water and land is to be managed, and then leading on to a conversation about what the limits and or targets ought to be. But the NPS for freshwater itself does not prescribe how or to whom freshwater should be allocated. The NPS itself remains silent on that. So we come back to the RMA's default again, first in, first served. A couple of years ago, the council adopted its Hawke's Bay Land and Water Management Strategy. In there, they had a number of high-level policies that were suggested as future courses of action around how land and water should be managed in the future. But even in that strategy, it didn't provide a prioritised list of who should be first in queue to get access to new water. But it did signal again that that sort of choice around who should access or get allocated water is a conversation to be had with communities, perhaps on a catchment by catchment basis. So one of those catchment by catchment kind of conversations is occurring at the moment in relation to the tank stakeholder group. So that's for the tank, Tūtakuri, Ahuri, Ngāraroto and Karamu catchment areas, plus the Hiratonga aquifer. That group's certainly having conversations about its values for water in the area. That'll turn its mind to what its objectives ought to be for land and water management in that area. And in those conversations, it may or may not choose, the group may or may not choose to make a call on how or to whom water is to be allocated. They might find that actually that's just a real hard nut to crack. Or they might have the courage and wherewithal to put up a proposal that in this group achieves some sort of consensus and is presented to this committee in future. If they don't make a call on that, again, the default position in the RMA stands, and that is that you're left with first in, first served kind of allocation regime. I think that's where I perhaps pass over to Malcolm, unless there's any questions on that stuff.
Well, I've got